be recorded. Seeing a quorum present, I will call the regularly scheduled public hearing meeting for the Annapolis Historic Preservation Commission to order. Our recording secretary is absent because of illness this evening, so it may be a little bumpy at times, but it looks like we have experienced speakers for the presentation and it won't go too far afoul. So what I'm going to do is, on behalf of the recording secretary, call the roll. Mr. Williams? I'm calling the roll.
I'm here.
Oh, good, good.
I didn't realize you were calling.
Yeah. Eric?
Here.
Cecil?
Cecil Cummins present.
Good. And Will Scott, chairman. So we have a quorum and we will proceed with tonight's meeting. And the first thing that I want to do is we have an application tonight for approval of some work on the Waterfront Hotel. And has everyone reviewed the staff report? And you've noted that the staff recommends approval with, I believe, was there one or two minor conditions, John? Well, no conditions are minor. They're all significant.
Right. Absolutely. So important. Let's see. Requires the applicant and owner to work with staff to file revisions for as yet unspecified design elements and for the umbrellas to be a solid color. Additionally, standing seam, roof seams must be hand folded and the roofs must be free of caps on ridges and valleys. Separately, staff recommends approval of the temporary kitchen with the condition that it be removed within 14 days of one of the first floor kitchens being placed in service.
Thank you, John. The applicant's representative is present. You're familiar with the recommended conditions and do you accept them? Yeah. Okay, just to be correct and do the best I can to meet the legal requirements, is there any member of the public present tonight who wishes to speak about this matter? Seeing none, may I have a motion for a good idea? Council is advising me. Could someone step forward and give their names, identify themselves as representatives for the applicant?
Good evening. This is Leo Wilson with Hammond Wilson Architects on behalf of the applicant.
Good.
Motion
Okay.
for consent docket. Is that right?
Yes. Is there a second to the motion to place this
Second.
on the consent?
Second
All in
the
favor?
motion.
Aye.
Aye.
Is there a motion to recommend approval of this application?
Motion to recommend approval.
Second the motion.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Very good. Thank you. You know, we have about 4.5 more hours we can spend on it. Okay. Now I would also like my fellow commissioners to consider a change to the announced agenda. And we are scheduled to review another project for which Mr. Wilson is the representative, but he has graciously agreed to wait until we conduct our work session with the representative of St. Mary's. Are you prepared to do that now? Oh, very good. We've asked them to wait a number of times, and they've been gracious about that. So let's go down to the table and hear their presentation.
May I just say before everyone joins around the table to try to speak into the mics so that what you say is recorded.
Very important for the recording secretary to be able to use that to prepare the minutes. Okay. An easy no.
Right.
It's on.
Do I have to introduce myself?
It's good for you to do it for the record.
Hello, I'm Patricia Mulligan. I chair the Environmental Stewardship Committee at St. Mary's, and I'm here to discuss our ongoing project in permitting now for a living shoreline and oyster reef. Thank you, at St. Mary's. This is an update.
I have to do a little something first. I just need to remind you and put on the record that this is a work session conducted for your benefit primarily, so that we can make known to you any concerns we have, the staff and the commissioners, and that whether we seem to recommend in favor or make favorable comments or negative, there is no approval or disapproval made at tonight's meeting. Okay?
Understand. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm here to update status of this project and the design, which we have briefed several times before. And in fact, we have significantly altered the design concept. We redesigned it, actually, to be responsive to comments we had gotten in earlier meetings. So if we could just start flipping through, it should not take very long.
Excuse me one moment. I'm sorry to interrupt. For the record, I would just like to say that Commissioner Greeley has arrived and will be participating in the work session.
Does he
Please go
copy?
ahead.
There we go. Thank you. We can go to the next page. Okay, right, St. Mary's. Just in case there's anyone here who isn't familiar with St. Mary's, this is the perspective from the water. The next page, it's worthwhile talking about this overhead just for a minute. This is the overhead. You can see that where the Duke of Gloucester is on the right, and 6th Street and the bridge also on the right. We're talking about a living shoreline that will encompass the entire shoreline of St. Mary's, from Shipwright Street all the way over to Duke of Gloucester. Issues to be aware of that we've dealt with in the past. Behind the wooden bulkhead that's in this scene, in the overhead, about 4 feet back between it and that line of boxwoods, which you see in this image, buried under the soil is a historic stone seawall, which has been an issue in the past, just so you know what we're referencing later on. I don't think there's anything else here that we need to be conscious of. I just might point out that, especially over the last year, we have had several flooding incidents in the church where the bulkhead was overtopped by a significant amount. On the western shore, it went in dozens of feet. All right?
Dozens of feet?
Yes.
As in
Dozens.
24 or more?
Yeah.
Do the park.
Oh, no. It's something that isn't clear from this overhead is that's a hill. You see where the grass is shaded a little bit greener?
Yeah.
That's where the inclination starts, and it's a pretty steep incline. Yes, exactly. Thank you. All right. I'm going to go through the next pages sort of quickly. I really think the meat of this, and it becomes most understandable when we get to the cross-sectional area, which is on chart 5, okay? So the next is just the architect's rendering of the same image I just showed you. It's the current condition. And the next page is the proposed condition. And this shows the living shoreline, which I believe, is, as I said, will be much easier to understand once we get to the cross-sectional area. But please stop me if I'm going too fast on this, going through. The next
Oh,
page.
excuse me.
Certainly.
I'm not familiar with the term turbidity curtain. Can you clarify?
Yes, it's a curtain that's dropped during construction to not allow, silt in the water
Yeah,
to
so
get
it's a
into
temporary
yes,
structure.
exactly.
Thanks.
Exactly correct. Okay. The proposed planting plan, which I'll talk about a little bit, has only been finished to the point of the plants that are going to be put on the wetland shelf, which I'll speak to in a moment, and it's all going to be Spartina alterniflora, which is the only plant that will survive under those conditions. There will be other plantings above. We haven't filled that in yet because we're watching the flooding, and that will be our final determinant. We also, and not shown on this, we have several academic partnerships in this project. One of them is Anne Arundel Community College. They will be attempting to plant submerged aquatic vegetation along the whole length also. That is experimental. We do not have any SAB in Spark Creek, but it would be very good if it could be established, and there will be mixed species for those plants. Okay, now we come to the crux of the matter. There's two shorelines. You know, there's the long shoreline that faces the Carroll House. And there's a shorter shoreline that faces a Shipwright Street, parallel to Shipwright, and then there's a little dogleg between them. The depth of the water varies a lot throughout the shoreline. That's why there's 4 quadrants here. They're showing the deepest and shallowest part of each facing shoreline. So I think a good place to start is, let's start on the upper left. The concept here is the wooden bulkhead will be kept in place unless something terrible happens with another storm. There will be a rock shelf established on the channel side of the bulkhead, which will not be moved. In the past, the last time we briefed here, this is a difference. We showed those rocks as enclosed in baskets called gabion baskets. We have changed that feature of the design because they wanted to substitute the metal for stainless steel, and it was just prohibitively expensive. Stainless steel would be more durable. There's been problems on other projects. That's why they backed away from that. So instead, there's this slope of riprap. It will form a shelf on the top of 4 to 6 feet, depending upon where you are, and a little trough will be built in the rocks. The landscaper will use landscaping fabric bags filled with planting medium, which is being developed in conjunction with the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. And we will plant Spartina alterniflora along the entire length of the shoreline. We will also attempt to simultaneously establish ribbed mussels in association with the Spartina. They're very important ecological species. They're not commercial, so there isn't a lot of data on how to establish ribbed mussels. They're working very hard at BIMS, and whatever point they've gotten to in their research, we will incorporate when we...
Why do you want to incorporate them?
By themselves, ribbed mussels take a lot of nitrogen, excess nitrogen out of the water. So does Spartina. But when the two are inhabiting the same physical area, they form a synergistic effect that boosts the uptake of, it's a facultative association. So it would really increase our nitrogen credits if we could do that.
And they, of course, wouldn't be seen at any point.
No, you will not. This Spartina can grow 3 to 5 feet, but of course it doesn't grow straight up. It bends over. So I think this image probably does represent what it will look like from the water. You'll be seeing a tallish grass against the back of the existing bulkhead, up to where the lawn grass is coming down to the existing bulkhead. Okay, now...
Are you saying that would create an appearance where the lawn grass actually came to the water's edge?
Rather to the land's edge. There'll be lawn, I'm sorry, did you say long or lawn? Lawn grass,
right,
yes.
the
Lawn grass currently comes to the water's edge.
Okay.
And that is a question of how long will lawn grass continue there because of the flooding and the brackishness of the water. Another feature that's really important is the facing. The facing that's on top of the rocks. Now, we'll get to that in a later chart. But these, right now, the medium we propose to use are a specialized type of brick that has perforations in it to establish an oyster reef. The perforated brick is soaked in a spat tank, and it will be laid on top of the surface of the rocks. And that's how we propose to establish our oyster reef next adjacent.
What's spank tank?
Excuse me? Oh, that's my New York accent. I apologize.
Oh.
Spat tank.
Okay. Now I think I understand.
It'll succeed at that angle?
Yeah, yes, it has very good. That's what our subcontractors tell us. That's a good question. I'll take it back to our designer. But we have had...
As a landscape architect.
I will bring it back. All right.
See that angle?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
not where oysters grow.
Yeah, they grow on flats. And on mountains.
Okay.
Or
Yes.
some-
Right.
You want it to be successful. Maybe it'll work, but I'm suspicious.
Okay. I will.
Is this 4 proposed potential grades? Like if each of these
Different locations.
Different locations, different depths. Right. Question on slope roaches. Okay, I will defer that to Joe Berg at Biohabitats, and I'll address the question.
Good.
And I should say,
This does not mean you're not stacking it,
that you
because if
Why
you
don't you-
are stacking
right.
it, then the interior flat open cell.
I think the spacing exaggerates the smoothness of the establishment. I do not believe it's meant to be faced like we're putting bricks against a wall. Rather, it's a rougher configuration. But
What keeps them? I mean, the brick is there.
yeah,
So
Mhm.
what that leads us to think that they're connected, mortared.
no, they are
just
loose.
laying there loose.
They're coming. They're being mounded against that property. And I should say, at the end of the day, depending on how prices go and when we get a start, they may revert to something else like Oyster Castle. So, all right. Perhaps we should have the picture redrawn to show the Oyster Castle possibility and how they would be stacked. Good question. Yeah. Okay. And I will have this back to you by tomorrow. Right. The answer to that. All right. I do not know yet how we intend to adhere or plant the SAB. That is yet to be determined when the academic advisors meet. And we haven't established that yet because it's been taking so many years to keep applying for funding. Now,
I should say right now that when you come, when and if you come for a formal request for approval, you've got to have all of that information. And I would suggest that you have it before you come for a final application.
I will certainly send off an early draft of our final presentation in for comment if you will allow me to.
It would probably be
Yes.
best if you scheduled another review session where you would bring
Yes,
it and just go
I will.
over those points.
I very much,
With a little bit more detail. I mean, here is the brick, correct?
yes,
So to go from here into any of these
Mhm.
sections, there's a leap on how that is actually
Mhm.
installed, which would affect structural integrity and the success of.
as I said, I really think that is misleading. It does make it look like it's integral part of the
Right.
pile, and I don't think that's the intent at all.
Okay.
It is the firm who proposed to do this is called Blue Oyster. All right, you know
the
them.
installer. not
Yes, they're the
bio-
installer,
bio-
right.
Yeah.
And they bring it in by barge, and they unload, pallet by pallet by pallet. And I don't think this is a precise placement
Right.
of
Okay.
bricks like you're building a brick wall.
Okay.
I want to talk a little bit about behind the bulkhead. As I said, it is our intention to plant wetland plants there. We want
Where the green is?
Yes, we want to install some. They don't have the final planting plan ready yet. I know that we'll have to have it at the end. And we had originally thought mainly of bringing in bayberries, trees and shrubs. But now we're rethinking whether perhaps some wetland grasses should go right behind the bulkhead.
How
Because as I
wide would
said,
that be?
well, there's been, as I said, we had several flooding instances last year. We haven't decided yet for sure. It's just under consideration. May I ask a question?
Yes.
You
that allowed?
you
Yes,
asked that. It makes
course it
is that permitted? Yes.
Conversation.
Thank you. In your experience, would a woody shrub be better?
Right.
Yeah. That's as I said. That's coming
And the
to
combination would be better, but
yes.
keep it simple.
Yes. We recall from that picture, the second picture of St. Mary's going in, the overhead,
Yeah.
that line of boxwoods, did you see?
Yeah.
There's the bulkhead. Go back a few weeks and you have the buried seawall, then back a few weeks and there's a boxwood. We call those the modern boxwoods because they're not the boxwoods behind, which are probably centuries old. It's sometime in the mid-1900s, we think these were planted, or a little bit earlier.
It's shocking they're as green as they.
Yes, we are wondering what's their longevity expected to be with the flooding that they're experiencing.
Eric, are you shocked because they are so green and have survived with
Yeah.
the intrusion of water?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's as bad as
Yes.
you're saying it is, that's shocking.
Yes.
Given all the other problems of boxes.
Yeah.
Why I don't have.
What do you know about the origin of that
Hmm?
What do you know about the origin of that historic seawall? What is the date?
Oh, it was established by Charles Carroll, I believe, late
Okay.
1600s. No, or was it early
Would have-
1700s? Oh,
Would have been
late,
mid 18th century.
Signer,
Yeah.
the signer. Yes. Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Do you have any intention to mark its location, given that you're rearranging things?
We will not rearrange anything over that. In fact, was part of the redesign we've done here earlier. And we've done ground penetrating radar, and so it has been mapped. The top layer is disaggregated. So we had not thought to do more. We earlier said we would bring an archaeologist, but we're not disturbing that soil or doing anything to it.
The concern is not for the seawall. The concern is that if you're doing work,
Uh-huh.
and before there had been boxwoods there, but that is a structure that dates to the period of relevance. Had you thought about just marking it off with a sign that says, this is what's down there, this is who laid it,
okay.
this is what it's made of, this is
Yes.
how it, it's not anything that we would ever consider suggesting if you weren't already doing the work, but if you're moving things around and maybe getting rid of those boxwoods, and we know where it is if you've done the radar.
Right.
I just was curious. I don't know that that's a request that we can make, but if we have, in the case of the city dock,
Uh-huh.
had a conversation with them about looking at where things on the city dock had been previously
Mm-hmm.
and marking them, not recreating them, but marking them somehow so that even
Yeah.
we're not going to dig it up, you're not going to dig a hole so we can see it, so that we know what was there, so you get a sense of the layers of the city.
That's, I will add that suggestion, signage.
Yeah, signage and markers so we can
Right.
see where it was.
Right. And I want to make clear, we have no intention ourselves to remove those boxwoods. We think, in fact, we think that's something we'll probably have to come back to you about unless they die naturally. And then we would do things. So I want to make it clear, we're trying to interfere with that land as little as possible. And when I say land, you should know it's landfill that was put in the late 80s. Yeah. Mhm. That's true. That's a good point. Hmm. Right.
And there were also either end
Hmm.
newly symmetrical pavilions.
That's. I have heard that.
They really need to be demarcated on your plan.
That's a very good point. We hadn't discussed that previously, I don't think, in any of our prior sessions. But that is a good point, because you might be able to make a constructive addition to us understanding the significance of that view shed and the fact that it was a signer who designed it and established it.
I just want to say, first and foremost, we are riddling you with questions. So thank you for putting up with this. I myself, I don't know, you are as well, new. So this is the first time I'm looking at it. I don't know if you've looked at it
all
well.
the questions you want. That's what this is.
So for me, I have two primary kind of questions. And forgive me, there might be a string here. Let me relay my train of thought, and I'll turn it back over. But a couple of things I think about is there's an existing, obviously historic seawall here. To my understanding is this is not visible, but it is there. My understanding is flooding is going to, potentially, we don't know when, but sometime in the future, ruin the way that this scenic facade, for lack of a better explanation, you probably have a better word, is currently viewed now. So something might need to be done at some point in the future, no matter what. Your guys' vision is putting together a living shoreline here to improve, the bulkhead in general without touching that historic seawall at all. And there's no way that historic seawall would be, potentially encumbered or ruined by this process. Walk us through how do you plan to, again, I know that you had asked Brendan about incorporating some potential components of marking the historic significance, but how do you plan to incorporate a historical aspect? Is this really just a focus of protecting the shoreline, or is there a focus of, also bringing a historical significance to it?
This has been from the outset an environmental project. I'm with the Environmental Stewardship Committee. The historical aspect has been the protection of the shoreline from erosion, following the new DOI guidelines, which in fact call living shorelines a best management practice for dealing with flooding at historic properties. But there had not been an additional historic feature. Am I getting a suggestion here that I should take that as an action and try to incorporate one?
No, nothing
Okay.
that we tell you tonight
Okay.
is that directive, but you certainly should consider it and discuss it with your team. And later we may say something more.
And I'll close out, the way that I look at this is something might need to be done. And so from us, we want to make sure that whatever might need to be done is, in alignment with the guidelines for, historic Annapolis, historic district, excuse me, but also, making sure that any historic significance there is not changed, or if it is changed, we're bringing more focus to it as opposed to more maybe hiding it more. And I don't know that you can hide it more if it's already buried, but that closes my thoughts.
I just want to walk you through how just process-wise,
Sure.
how we did this with the city and the city dock is we just posed the question. There, they had the luxury of all these old insurance maps that showed literally exactly what was there, where the outline was, how it changed over the decades. So we really had a layered sense of the history of the city. I don't know that you have that luxury here, but we do know where it is. And so we said, what is your plan to, since you're starting from scratch, show us a layered sense of the history of who worked at the city dock? That was a question. They came back to us with a response that said, we're not going to change the layout of the park.
Yeah.
But what we can do is mark some things in strategic places with signage. So I don't think that we can say that's what you have to do.
Right.
But in that case, that was the process. We said it's important to sort of get a layered sense of the history of the city. Do you have thoughts about that? And you can come back to us with a plan. It's kind of, listen, we don't have Monticello here, but we do have Charles Carroll's seawall.
Right.
That he put in. I didn't know that was there. I think it's kind of neat. And it'd be nice to have a real sense of here was a thing that a landowner whose name is known to us now had to deal with. He's essentially dealing with the same problem. Here was his solution. Here is ours.
Just from the historic sense, it really wasn't that he was dealing with an erosion problem. He was taking his front yard and he was turning it into as close to a European garden as he could. And being one of the richest men in the colonies, he wanted it to sparkle. And so this is literally what he built, the first recorded seawall in the colonies.
Pretty cool.
And it's you can go to the foot of the Spa Creek Bridge and see part of it. And it is made of the indigenous sedimentary stone which is also part of the visible foundation of the Charles Carroll House, and beautifully dressed. I mean, of a very fine quality that was typically absent in workmanship, craftsmanship for something like a utility wall. But it's still there, and its appearance is that it needs no maintenance. And let me tell you, I'm pretty sure it's gotten no maintenance. So that's pretty amazing.
Pretty interesting fact that
Mhm.
on either side is just fascinating for me. I did have a question. Is there any evident erosion now?
You mean behind the bulkhead? Yes. 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 A significant number of the upright piers by back next. So it is the worst.
Okay.
Now, if you don't mind, John stole part of my thunder, but that's okay. One of the, you're talking about doing some markings and all along the edge. People go by this point all the
Yes,
time. They don't know what's there. That's the only spot that you can see that wall. So that could
That's
be
true.
that could be highlighted and then say this continues to there, and that's where one of the pavilions was. And the sign could be sitting right down there on the bridge or just adjacent to the wall. So you could, so they can sit there, see the sign, see the image. It's all. And the fact that you're building the wall is protecting that old wall. And it sounds like if that current bulkheading does completely fail, that wall is going to be in serious trouble. So the sooner the better.
And to that point, I think it would be really helpful if you could show us how that would be preserved. If there's a way where this covers that, I don't know that we'd be able, or speaking for myself, I don't know that I'd be able to necessarily prove something that hides an existing exposed component of history. But if to that point it brings light to that little piece that can be seen, I think that's a lot easier for me to be able to say this is protecting the rest of this and showing. But
I've lived here all my life. It wasn't until about 20 years ago that wall.
I've lived here for 40 some years, and I knew about the same time you did. Somebody told me about it. Yeah.
Charles Carroll's wall was visible.
It was visible when I moved here.
Wooden bulkhead is
Not right.
is fairly
Right.
recent.
I think we're having a very good discussion at this point, in the sense that these are good ideas that we never discussed previously in our sessions. And I would certainly say that, to me, this is a sacrosanct view. I'm very concerned about even what you're updating us with tonight. But the idea that it would be preserving Carroll's original work and calling better attention and notifying the public of how significant it is an ameliorating factor for me. But I think you should complete your presentation, and then we should hear from John. Okay?
we should turn off our mics for the rest of the time.
Then we won't have to shuffle them around as much.
Sorry, the last thing I was going, we jumped ahead a little bit.
It's okay.
The last
Sure. Yeah, please.
Actually, I think I am pretty much through. I think I'll give you an update for your information. I will get back to you with these concerns very quickly, because we have been trying for many, many years to get this project funded. And last week, a team we are part of was selected for under the whole watershed program, a new program under DNR. For the Severn Rivers watershed, and we are one of the projects in that team. Now, we don't know we're going to be funded. They have a lot of projects, but we are much further along in design and permitting than most of their projects. So there's a good chance.
I hesitate to ask this, but this is our state DNR, not the Interior Department.
From state DNR, yes.
Thank you.
And the whole watershed program was something that, a program that Senator Elfreth was very involved
Oh,
in
yeah.
instigating.
Yes, yes. John, want to?
So
Give us your input.
just some background that I don't think was mentioned before, but I think most commissioners are aware. We've been looking at this project in different designs for over 3 years.
Oh, yeah, since 2017.
2017.
I wasn't on the commission in
Yes.
2017, so.
My life flashes
Yeah.
before me. Campus Fugit. So anyway, I have to say this is one of the least intrusive designs. I love the idea that the work is being done from the water, from a barge. That's a step forward. The greatest accomplishment, of course, would be to restore Charles Carroll's Wall and maybe to add a couple of layers of additional stone. But that's not what you're applying. In our heart of hearts, all of us will go to bed dreaming of it tonight.
I will. Oh, please.
I'll start with a positive. Just to point out, Biohabitats is top drawer. I've worked with them many times. I know Keith, the founder.
So might want to speak up a little bit or move
the
that closer.
Keith and Biohabitats is they do things right. So even though I questioned it, I would imagine that they're going to answer it very well. But I would like the answer. I guess I just want to preface this that I was co-chair of the Cultural Landscape Foundation. So cultural landscapes is something that I think is really important and is of great value to the city of Annapolis and beyond. And I don't see that this proposed plan really addresses the period of significance, which is quite evident. And I also wanted to add to what John was saying is these straight approaches to homes from the water that's part of the history, the straightness and the masonry, because that's how people approached. It's where they docked their boats, and it's how they got to.
It was the primary entrance.
Yes.
Right, from Carroll's Creek.
Yes.
It was his creek.
And it's the only one in the city of Annapolis and one of the few remaining straight ones within the Chesapeake Bay.
Yes.
So
Is Whitehall considered one at this
Pardon?
time? Is Whitehall considered one?
yes, that's
that-
another one.
Yeah. I just want to, that helps me think about what you're saying. Thank you.
And also, I think it should be noted that this was built, the pavilions and the masonry wall were built by enslaved people. So bringing that to life, making the invisible visible, I think has to be part of this, how we do this. Yes, quite frankly, my recommendation is come up with a scheme that restores and refurbishes that stone wall. For one thing, the environmental, the planting at the top of this wall does nothing environmentally. Like the significance is nearly zero. It's not going to make a difference whatsoever.
I believe that avoid certainly being
Right. I mean, I even question calling this a living shoreline, particularly without seeing what you're planning to do on top of the wall. That maybe could make a difference to hold that slope. In fact, if the existing wood was repaired and backfilled correctly and planted on top, that could do it too. So there's many ways to approach this. So I don't know. I find the whole project misdirected.
Yes. Yes. Just for clarification, because we have new commissioners.
Yeah.
Already. What the procedure is now is first, my best, the chair, take it and do what they think.
If we're actually talking about the dream goal of somehow exposing that wall again and highlighting it rather than just marking it and remembering it with signage. I know this isn't to scale. Is there a way to make the shoreline live all the way back to the wall? Meaning, right now, you've got the grasses sitting on top of this, the riprap. Is there a way to dig back and have grasses all the way back to where that wall was exposed?
Yeah, of course.
Probably, I didn't want to go over the entire history of this again.
Okay.
We've been-
And with that, I will say that I'm a historian and not a landscape architect.
Okay. When we first came in, we had a different landscape. We had Underwood. And our first design, which was funded by the state, was a headland and Tumbler, little coves all the way through. It excavated all the way, not only to the seawall, but past it. The first, the HPC at the time voted non-feasible after the funding was done, and we could not get permitted, and we lost our grant to build it. We, at our own expense, redesigned entirely. We went to biohabitats and asked, we were told, make it linear, don't excavate near the wall. So yes, we could excavate, but the prior HPC told us not to excavate near the wall. And after we've done that for several years, we did come to a point where you've read the earlier minutes where the commission said, yes, this is a feasible design. So one question I had is, can the design that was previously marked as feasible by HPC, now with the later commission, can we now be rated infeasible?
The short answer to that is yes. Remember that every work session is only to state feasibility.
Yes.
And now that essentially is moot because you've brought to us a new, and I will say that they have invested a lot of time and energy, and this is, in my estimation, superior to all their previous presentations. I will say more after I hear from the rest of the commissioners. Remember, those work sessions are not approval or disapproval.
Right, I understand.
Now, I remember that first one because unfortunately or unfortunately, my office was slightly involved with that one. And it was more of a recreation of wetlands and those things down at the crotch. There was more of a basin that was created from what memory. To me, this seems to reflect more of the fact that there is a wall, even though it's hidden, and kind of recreates that face much more than the previously proposed, which made it look like you were coming into a slightly sloping, grassed up shoreline. And I understand the idea of let's make it natural and everything, but it goes back to the historic face of the property. And if we change that, I just feel that we're going against not just what we said before, but what we're saying now, where we're talking about delineating there is a wall, whether we see it or not. We're going to put points down. And then how do we do that that maintains the integrity of the wall, the integrity of the original design of Carroll, and still protect it? And again, to stretch that out with more grasses and all kind of softens that edge to such a degree that you may lose that.
No, I would agree. That wasn't what I was suggesting.
No, also, again, as the non-landscape architect here and also non-architect here, I also understand that the back and forth with this commission, as everyone in this room can attest, given the constantly shifting makeup in the commission, can be a little maddening. So I think we also understand that there's a very long conversation going on here that we need to be aware of.
Can you close
Another
me
question.
out?
No, I just wanted to say that for as far as we had talked about the idea of exposing that wall and highlighting it. I think for my purposes, public history around the existence of the wall would be great. That's already a step beyond what's on the plan here, and that.
Has anyone looked into the structural integrity of that wall? And how can we assure that any disturbance in this area isn't going to undermine whatever structural integrity there is?
That's a very
So,
important
I
question
would,
that
I
don't
would
think
say
has been asked.
if you look at the way that the blocks are laid out in the plan here, and I can't remember which of these drawings shows it, but it's on one of the plans, and they've moved. The top layer has moved. So what happened, I think, was when the wall was intact and the major renovations occurred to the Carroll House, I guess, in the early 1980s.
Mhm.
The equipment creating this bulkhead, which is from that long ago, rolled over and worked on top of the Charles Carroll.
Because they were
seawall.
building it from the land.
They were
not
building it from the land.
not the-
Right. And I don't think a lot of care was taken. And I think that dislodged and moved the top layer. So when you see what ground penetrating radar shows, it shows a wall that has shifted. Now, maybe it has shifted. You know, it was there for literally 200 and some odd years before the bulkhead was put in. However, if you look at it at the base of Duke of Gloucester Street, it's just remarkable.
Mhm.
So of course, it would be great to be able to show a section of this wall.
This, this isn't an easy problem.
Mm.
And any disturbance there at all, potentially, whether from land most definitely, but even from the water side, is risky of damaging that historic wall.
Cecil, you want to say something before I sum up?
Yeah. So these are my closing comments, and I might defer to you. You might have an additional comment based on what I say. But so overall, I read all of the minutes in the past. I haven't seen past plans, so I can't necessarily refer to those. What it seems like, from what I'm hearing and from what I'm reading, is that this is an impending problem. And so I think not only do we as commissioners have a responsibility to protect and preserve the history, but also recognize that the shoreline's going to change whether we have anything to do with it or not. So I would be a proponent for something happening here if there is factual reports that can show us what that looks like over time. So one of the requests that I would have is I would like to understand not only how the floodplain shows here, but also you had mentioned erosion reports, if there's, and then flooding events. If you could provide some type of report or drawings to show what has happened over the last, at least 5 years, if not, or 10 years, I think that's really important. And then maybe what the next 10 or 20 years looks like. Because if something's going to ruin this shoreline, whether we have anything to do with it or not, I think it's important for us to talk about how we can preserve that. The second thing is there is clear history here. So I think that there has to be some, component that preserves that or exposes, if it's possible, and adding in some type of plaque and some type of place where people can bring their boat up and see that, if also not from the street, I think is really important. I'd like to see a component there that highlights that. I think it's also important to the comment on the integrity of the seawall that is buried. I think it's important for us to understand what the impact study, if there's an impact study that was done on what would happen to the wall. I know that you had mentioned doing the work from the water is a significant improvement from the land. I'm not going to begin to say I understand what that impact would be, so I'd like to hear from an expert on what that impact would be. And then I want to defer to you on the types of plantings or whatnot, because I think I'm going to follow his lead completely on how the plantings are, going to be a long-term success or not. So those are my comments, but I do think that it's important that this is something that we try to move to an approval in some way, a feasible design, and not something that takes another 5 years. Because we don't want to be a part of commission that pushes something along and then something happens and next thing you know it's crumbling into the water. And
So could I just points of past facts, we did have a report about the condition of the current wooden bulkhead, and that it is substantially deteriorated below the water, and that it's undermined, and that accounts for some of the falling grade just behind the bulkhead. That it's literally falling down now. So something has to be done because that will affect the Carroll seawall. So the stabilization is important to preserve the historic feature, in my opinion. But you do have data on flooding from that you've shown in the past. It's just not included.
To me, it seems like I have full confidence in Biohabitat, but they're not culture. They have no understanding of cultural landscapes. I know them, and that's not what they do. It seems like that's what we're missing here. How can we interpret the cultural landscape and remember the past, make it part of the present? And I just want to point out that Traceries did do a cultural landscape report on just this piece, and I believe the city does have a copy of that.
Yeah, I could distribute that.
But you haven't seen it?
Okay, I think I can sum up our discussion and I hope make it clear so that you can take it and utilize it. I think that one of my concerns is that there were a number of points where we asked for specificity and it wasn't present. So, and we're kind of just talking about that right now also. So that would be important for you to consider if you come forward again, either for a work session or for a request for approval. But I also will say for myself, and I've heard it from all the rest of the commissioners and from the staff, that what we most are concerned about is the history and the integrity of the history, the landscape, the Carroll bulkhead, and if there's a way to incorporate that so that it's clearer, or in the best case scenario, even exposed so that we see the Carroll bulkhead and still protect, as you were saying very well, I think, the fact that there's going to be change and we know that, and you're trying to help protect that aspect. But I will say for myself, and the rest of you will need to chime in or not, at this point, I still don't see this as feasible. It's an improvement, a great improvement, and I appreciate all the work you've put into it. But the history has to be incorporated more completely and productively, for lack of a better word. Am I fairly?
I just want to make sure that I think I understand what you said, but I think I agree with it. But the sort of the step 2 feasible step shows the plan to incorporate all.
Yes.
Some public history.
Yes.
That's the next. That's missing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and it sounds like there might be already reports done and past components of this, even if they change, that you can incorporate the floodplain, you can incorporate that study that you mentioned. And if all of that can be together in this application, I think that's going to answer a lot of specificities.
I think not to increase your design fees, which sound like you've been through a lot, but incorporating a landscape architect who specializes in cultural landscapes would add to this project tremendously.
And I would say, given our discussion, that for me, getting that incorporated somehow in your request for approval might be enough for me to say, yeah, I think.
I want to make sure I understand the concerns as I've heard them. The critical, am I correct that the critical factor you are hoping to have incorporated, excuse me, is the documentation elevation of the historic features? I mean, are you asking us to try to figure out a way to excavate the historic seawall?
I don't
We
think
don't know if
so.
it's-
Yeah.
But
We
an
need to
impact
know
study
it's-
on how it's impacted.
Right. Because that's two entirely different things. This has begun, the genesis of this is an environmental project.
Right.
And the reason it isn't more of an environmental project is we've reduced the footprint to address the historical concerns.
Be
So-
the only commission, well, no, you've been here for the whole thing. From first.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Then the way I would say it, for the benefit of those who haven't been reviewing the project previously, every step has been a step forward and improved both, it seems, the environmental protection, but only make very small element. I think what we're saying to you tonight, we think that's at least as
Mhm.
you
Got
need to see how you.
Oh, I promise you, we will, and we will do it quick too.
Does seem like the wonder if we need to clarify this goes into the wall.
I don't think we can. I don't think we can say that.
I agree.
Meaning that we can't. So
We can't. The way that I would express it is that if you show me that you've done the requisite investigative work to say this is going to be, a $50 million project, but we can preserve the environment and not destroy what's there, that to me would probably allow me to move forward.
And if
but
I may
we
add
don't
on,
know-
anything
we
that is exposed can't be hidden by whatever's put in. I think
Yeah.
that's important as well.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like near the bridge.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
That's already. Yeah. That's already.
Yeah.
That's already.
Or-
So-
and just for clarity, to me, that's
Mhm.
not a clear feature. So I think even if it's literally just one page where it highlights that part of the exposed
Yes.
seawall and says, hey, this is going to stay exactly the way it is, literally just a picture of it saying that,
Yeah.
would
Yes.
help.
You're saying that you've investigated and documented, and this is unfeasible for whatever reason. That's up to you. Expense, time, whatever. That is answering my questions and allowing me to make a final decision.
plus the public.
Yes.
Well, yeah. Okay.
And I do think that the planting component that you had mentioned, I think is important.
Yes.
Because we don't want to necessarily approve something that's not going to be successful in the long term. So I'm going to go with however he votes
Yeah.
on that front.
I'm not going to tell anybody how to do anything unless you're
Yeah.
paying me.
I will tell you.
That's fair. Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you for taking so much time and effort to do this.
Thank you for the feedback. I'm grateful for it. And I promise you, and I think John will attest, I have been very responsive
Yeah,
to directions.
that's
in the
true.
past,
That's
and,
true. Or we wouldn't be here tonight.
And I will endeavor to do it again. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, John.
John, I'm getting a for my ride. I've always had a problem with the cramp.
Are we staying down here or are we back up?
Oh, we go back up. We want to give Leo all the proper consideration that we can. Get the bang now. Oh. Are you going to move over there? Leo, you can go ahead and sit down and introduce yourselves. And oh, okay, gotcha. please.
Good evening. My name is Leo Wilson, and next to me is Chris Frank, partner at Hammond Wilson Architects. And we're here this evening to talk about 1014 Church Circle. You've received an application from our office that reflects the current application. And for reference, we have been here before to talk about alterations to the existing structure. We withdrew that application to provide ourselves the opportunity to come back to you and talk to you about an alternative solution we think might be more acceptable to the commission. So we'd like to talk about that tonight.
And
So
I want to say for the record, we appreciate you creating that little area of the white splash that gave us an idea of what you were proposing.
happy to do it. I think it was instructive. I know it was for us. I hope it was for you. So you want to just, do you want to click through these, Chris, or you want me to? So I'll go through some of the application components, and then we can talk about the details if that's okay.
Yeah.
So the structure we're talking about tonight is 1014 Church Circle. You all know that this was at one point a bank building, which has since changed hands with the change in how people do business from a banking standpoint. The building was constructed, I believe, in the 60s, if I'm not mistaken. And this is
70s.
70s, my mistake, 71. So yeah, here's a aerial view of it next. Site plan, these are all in your application package, just kind of things that people who don't know the structure know where it is. It's right on Church Circle. We looked at the Sanborn map. This is interesting because there are several of them, but this particular one shows the configuration of the structures on that same parcel at a much earlier time. And you can see they were set back from the circle, and were actually 3 buildings where the one sits today. Nick? There's the site again. We were trying to make sure we were well informed about the history of the site in addition to the building itself. These were more, I think, of general interest than anything else. Nick? Again, another image from a different time of where the site sits. And here you can see the prior structures there. Can you read that, Chris, for me? 37, yeah.
It did.
So here are some photographs, or here's a photograph of the structure prior to demolition before the new bank was built. It's interesting to note that it was not brick. It was painted. It was white. Isn't that interesting?
Now, Leo, I want to point out that they did not get approval for that.
Do we have any sense of what it was? Was it painted brick?
I believe it was painted brick, yes. And then here's another shot, which, these are just historical images that we found. These are probably from then and again, but we did a lot of research in different areas. That's one I think it could have been from. Yeah. Yeah, it was much less formal than it is today, isn't it, with the sidewalk?
You're digging by hand through the land records for these?
Yeah, for some of it we did.
Hope you weren't rolling through Mike.
Not for this one, no.
That's one of the worst things that a scholar can have to do.
That right after grant writing.
In a few years, people won't know what you're talking about. Luckily, the age
Most
group
people
here
don't know
does.
now.
Next slide, please. This is what we have today. As you can see, the building is, go back to that slide. Yeah, it's, when it changed hands, this was right away after it changed hands. And we did some cleaning over there, but the building was kind of let go with the change in ownership. And the roof's also in bad shape. We can talk about that later. Go ahead. Just some more shots of the building as it appears in current times. So, so let's talk a little bit about the building as it sits today. You know, it's a clear example of brutalist architecture. There's a few of them in town, but not many. It's really a type of architecture that was simple and blocky and usually monolithic, but in this case, it has a combination of the precast lintels or the white pieces on the masonry or brick piers. So a little bit different than most of the brutal buildings, but that's clearly what it is. Next. So when we came and talked to you last time, we were looking at painting the building, and we looked at white because we thought, you know, we've seen some successful examples of changing buildings from brick to a painted brick, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But the concern from the commission members at that time was that it was a pretty stark departure from what was there today, and we really couldn't get a sense of, you know, you almost obliterated the sense that it was brick because it was a heavy coating, and your point's well taken. So we looked back again at the potential to whitewash it, and we talked to you a little bit about that. And the recommendation was let's do a sample and see what that looks like. So the product we use, this seems to be a flexible one because it comes in different colors. It's not a stark white. In the end, we picked one that was gray, but which I think is a little bit more successful. But next, more about the bricks. This is just in your package, or about the coating process. So these are sample images. Keep going. You can see that the use of a lime wash is it provides a good deal of transparency, or it can provide a good deal of transparency, depending on the percentage of water that's added to the lime wash mix. So it's nice because it can be adjusted up and down. And in the picture on the left, you can see a relatively heavy coating on the left piece, and then as you shift to the right, a lighter coating. And it seems that, you know, they're two different things. I think it is quite different. Next. A project we completed on the Eastern Shore several years ago. This was a reproduction kind of, I think this is probably from the 80s when it was built. Our clients purchased it, and he wanted to change the character of the building. And so he asked us to look at a lime wash, and we tested it and thought it was pretty effective in changing the character of the building and softening some of the pieces of it. So these are just some before and afters of what happens when you do that. Next. We took the lime wash product, and you can do it in several ways. You can see the first one has much more water in it, 40 parts water, so the brick becomes more visible through it. And then as you go to 32 and then finally 24, it starts to obscure the brick surface a bit more. Certainly you can do more or less, but these were three we picked because they seemed to work. Next. So what we did is, here's our building. We applied some samples you can see in the red outlined area. Next. These are the three levels we looked at. We selected the middle one because we thought the one that was less opaque was not successful, and the one that was more was not as well. So we picked a middle spot. Next. Here you can see on the left a further away shot of the samples, and then on the right the close-up as it was going up. And again, we tried two different samples here. On the image on the right, let's go to the next one. I think you can see it better. Yeah, so concentrate on the two on the bottom. The left and the right were two different shades of the lime wash that were available. The one on the left is white, and the one on the right is gray. It's a nubile gray, I think it's called. And then we took the one on the left and did it up higher because in the corner the masonry had been repointed poorly, and so the white grout doesn't look so great. So and it was not a representative sample because it was, you know, in an area that had been altered. So we moved the sample up, and you can see it's a little bit different at the top. that being said, when we go to the close-up images, you can see that the white, which I thought was going to be the more successful of the two, highlights dramatically the mortar joints being so much different than the brick. And it doesn't appear that way to me right now when you see it in its raw form. So we thought the gray was nice because it has a little bit more ability to provide a harmonious surface that doesn't seem so, I guess, striated with the mortar joint. Different times of day. We looked at it in the morning, we looked at it in midday, in the afternoons, and you can see, you know, it softens quite a bit as the light drops off. So these are renderings we did to give you a sense of what we think will be happening here. This shows kind of what we see today. It's actually not a bad image. It's, you know, it doesn't look terrible. It's a very large building, and my sense is that it would be far more successful if it was all brick. And I looked at trying to remove those panels with the white, and there's just not a good way to do it. And we're going to look at the roof later, but right now we're just focused on the masonry and the lintel pieces.
Excuse me, when you said there's not a good way to do it, is that because they're structurally integral to the building?
They are. Yeah, they're cast and set on top of the masonry piers there. They're reinforced concrete panels, and they're in disrepair. There's some areas where the rebar is visible through cracks.
So if you pulled them out and replaced them, you'd have to do something to where the attachments are currently.
Yeah, and it's pretty integral. So you'd have to kind of cut those out and then put concrete panels that were structural behind it, and then a masonry veneer for the brick over top of it. And it's prohibitive in terms of, you know, being reasonable. Next. So we did this in layers. This is the lighter of the lime washes. These are the gray, actually. You know, the image changes color a little bit. It's hard to get a real good sense of it. And you can see the lime wash varies somewhat from area to area just because it's a hand-applied finish. But I think the image might overstate it a little bit because the photographs we showed earlier show it a little more uniform. But this is how the rendering comes out.
I'm going to cycle back.
Yeah. No. Right. So the third one, you can see the lime wash is really it's you know, it's very white. It's very, you know, it is heavy. But if you toggle back one for me, Chris, you can see, you know, the brick still appears as brick. It just seems like a nice way because the brick isn't. It's not a brick that's consistent with the coloration we would have seen of an older building. It's got much more pink in it. And the mortar has a little pink in it too. And so you start to look at it up close and it feels very pink to me as compared to the other brick, which is more like an orange or red. And so the handsome nature of the masonry I see in the other buildings of the historic time of most of the work there is much nicer than it is on this building. So that's my opinion. Next.
Quick comment. I think what you're showing us on the screen is different than what's on the application. I think the only difference is the roof, maybe, or something.
Yes, that's right. So I told my team when I was looking at these images that the discussion about the roof is a separate one that's under a separate approval to change it to black, and that can be handled administratively. We've already worked through that with Mr. Tower. So I said, because we're not asking for that as part of this, leave the roof at the color it is today. So we can look at it in a different way in a short while here.
Because of the point you just made, I want to ask, John, have you reviewed these slides and this part of the presentation? Are you familiar with the appearance that they're presenting?
Oh, familiar enough. It is slightly different, but I mean, it doesn't have to be part of the presentation package if the item that is being discussed has a separate approval.
No. I mean, the effect of the different washes, lime washes.
And I just want to comment, the difference that I noted, I think, was the roof, but I didn't know that was the only difference.
I'm not addressing the roof, okay. But because you're raising
Well, I didn't know that was the only difference. I was asking just to confirm.
Yeah.
I've looked at the different effects.
Yeah, before you wrote your staff report, you had
Yes.
seen this stuff. Thanks.
So next one, Chris. Yeah, so these are the progressions through it. Again, you can see you can handle it in different ways. My fear is the third one is a little bit more abrupt than I want it to be. Look, what I'm trying to do with this building is we have a new owner who wants to create, a building he thinks is more handsome for this spot. And to me, the building as it sits today is, I can clean it, I can do what you want to it, but it's not at all contextual, and it's not of the historic time. It's not a contributing building. It just happens to have been here since the 70s, but it doesn't make it good. And so, absent taking it down and starting over with something that would work a little better, we think this is an easy way, a less complicated way to change the character of the building and soften it a touch. That's what we're trying to do, is soften the imagery of this building a touch so it sits in the context in a little less prominent way. Now, you have to remember these renderings don't take into account things like shadow, and here it shows in bright light, but the piece that faces a circle for the majority of the day is in shade because it faces northwest, probably more northwest, but that's the orientation. Next slide.
Quick other clarifying question before you, and I don't think that this is on the application, but because it's on the rendering, the portico, or that type of roof that comes out, and the signage that's there does not currently exist. That's not a part of the application. It's just in the rendering.
No, we were experimenting with other ways to try and make the building feel a little more friendly. So those, but right now we're just in for the color. Okay. So again, a little close-up shot. We are anticipating future applications and things to work through that would include planners and lighting for this building, which would help some. Try and soften the way the planners are a little small. I don't disagree with you, Commissioner Groff. Next one. And then these are the iterations of the color on it. This is the medium one, and then this is the whitest one. So I ruled this out because I didn't think it looked good, but drop back one for me, Chris. So this started to feel like, I can still tell there's brick. I can still tell there's a separation between the masonry and the brick, or the concrete lintels and the brick, but this started to feel nice to me. This started to feel like it was a little bit softer and friendlier without changing the character of the building too much, but it just softened it a little bit. And I think anyone who's walked by there can say it doesn't feel warm and friendly. It feels cold and desolate to me. My client probably wouldn't like me to say that, but that's what I think. Next one. A couple more images. We shifted over to try and do it with Photoshop over top of photos we took. These are really hard to do because the light subtleties are different from spot to spot, but this is where we are today. This is 1 level, 2 levels, 3 levels, and I just thought it looked cartoonish because it's hard to do the Photoshop, which is why we did the samples. We wanted to make sure. So I didn't include more of these in this presentation. Next one, because I didn't think they're a good representation of what I expect it to look like. So let's talk about what else is happening down there. Next. So we talked about brutalist architecture. This was a thing, right? And there's many buildings that are of note that follow that that design approach. And I think you'd agree that these are not buildings that work well in a context that's historic. These are buildings that are object buildings. They're not context buildings. And so all of them struggle with that. In some places it's appropriate. In this space, I would say I wish I wasn't so much of an object building. So soften it made sense to me.
Did you consult with King Charles on this point?
I did not. No. An overhead shot. I think go to the next one. This one doesn't tell us too much. We can skip through these two a little bit. I think what I was thinking when I looked at this thing is, look, Mr. Towers' comments are well taken. There's a lot of masonry on the circle, and the church, of course, is the central focal element of this location in this city, but it is surrounded by a large assortment of architectural styles and colors. And so you can see other buildings on the circle are handled in a different way. Indeed, there's one there that's masonry that's brick that is painted as well. So another image of
which one is brick that's painted?
Isn't the one on the corner?
No,
I'm
It's
sorry,
stucco,
John.
isn't it?
it's stucco, but it's over wood.
I'm
Stucco
sorry.
over wood.
Yeah, so it's
Right.
it's a cementitious coating on it. My mistake.
Well, and that was common in the day.
And then as you move around the circle, we just were taking photographs, and go back one, please. So here you can see the church is the focal element, and these other elements are kind of supporting characters to the church. And I think this is successful to me. This is the approach when you first get to the circle. Next. Again, you've got a kind of a blend of materials here and colors. So yeah, there are a few that are brick. I would argue that this building, the one we're looking at now, where Aqua is appropriate as brick, because the brick is nicer and it's got the fenestration that matches more closely what you would expect for buildings like that. Here under the building itself, you can see how dark it gets under there. And also you can see the variation in color for all of the buildings around it. And I think that's nice. So next. Just more shots around there. Next. And then we went down Main Street, and we've talked about this before, and I know that there's a case to be made that, well, you really should be looking within a half a block. Well, I mean, that may be true. My experience is, my office was downtown for a long time. I walked downtown. I walked for the parade the other day. I experienced all these things in a single visit to the historic district. So these are other buildings. I thought, look at all the color we see. Now, this one is always a sore subject for people because, this one was painted white. And I go, well, these guys did it. They have the biggest building in town on the waterfront. And I would argue that it feels better and friendlier in the white than it did in the masonry. Again, not from a dissimilar time. This was a little bit earlier. This was in the 60s, 67, I think. So a few more. I won't dwell on these very much, but you can see these images all show a mix of architectural styles and finishes, and some painted brick and some that are painted wood siding, and some are stucco. And so the variation in these buildings, I think, adds to the experience. And I'd like to have our building be something other than just trying to be a brick building that just, it feels cold and not great there. And I think this would soften it. Now, this image is the one where I left the brick roof or the black roof on, because it is our intent to paint it black. So this is what we're hoping we'll end up with. And I think it, it's a first step in trying to change the character of the building so it doesn't feel like it has felt for how many years is it, from 60 to 25. At one point, I believe that was true.
What's the case now?
Well, it doesn't look like copper to me. It looks like somebody painted it with bronze paint.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just...
Looks almost like plastic.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Looks like-
shiny. It's shiny. So we thought the matte black finish, where it's actually a deep gray, because the black sometimes is a bit jarring too. So much like the lime wash, it's intended to soften the appearance of the building without obliterating the texture. And the same with the roof. It's intended to soften it without making it a heavy black top. So, so where's that leave us? Well, I know that Mr. Tower, whose opinion I respect very much, is not in favor of this change, and I respect that. From my standpoint, the easiest thing to do is to not change it, because we have it and it is what it is. And like much of my work, the intent here is to provide some type of intervention that makes things better. And for me, I'd like to do more, but this is, I can't take the building down. It doesn't make any sense. I want to provide a different experience on Church Circle, and I think this is an intervention that's really very, very modest considering everything else we see happen. And so I've been doing this a very long time, as you all know, and I don't take this lightly. And if it turned out terrible, I'd carry that, because this is what I do. And so I'm asking you for some latitude to provide a modest intervention on a building that I think, frankly, can't be worse. So, so that's what I'm asking. And I'll respectfully close my comments unless you think of anything else. Oh, there was one other thing. We went through the guidelines. Do you have those for me here? And Mr. Tower, who looked at the guidelines for the wall systems and the finishes, quoted a couple of them here, and I just wanted to point out, like, one of them was D9, right, Chris? So
D8.
D8, I'm sorry. So we don't review appearance, paint colors, blah blah blah, which I get, right? We're not painting it, and it's an older building, but I'm going to skip D8 because I don't think it applies. The one I was most concerned about was guidelines for preserving and protecting historic wall systems, D13, which you quoted as well. And I thought, well, this specifically talks about historic masonry, and I would argue that that is not applicable on this particular application because there's nothing historic about that masonry. And that's why, we were thinking about, well, what does 8 tell us, And it says, colors should be compatible. Historic color schemes should be subordinate to the composition of building elements. I guess that means they don't want you to paint it neon. I couldn't figure out, like, how this one would apply to me because, again, like, we're not changing the color. We're providing, a surface treatment, if you will. So it's a little weak, but 13 I certainly didn't feel was applicable in this instance. So I wanted to just point that out. And as always, I'm happy to talk more about it, but at this point I'll conclude my presentation.
Okay, I think that was a very clear and succinct presentation. But do the commissioners have any questions for clarification before we move on to the staff report?
I do, but I don't need to go first. Somebody else does.
Well, you're the first who spoke up, so you will go first, I hope.
So one component here that I think is interesting is, obviously D8 says that, the commission does not review exterior paint colors except in cases when it forms an integral part of the material. So as a part of the application, it does not specify the paint color that will be used. And my question for clarification, might be for you, but might also be for you, Mr. Chairman. If there was a conditional approval considered, can we dictate which lime wash would be used as a part of our approval?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
So that was one primary question that I had. I have another, but I want to think through it a little bit more before.
Okay.
If this intervention is going to make them happy, well, these things are interesting to me. I think it will be the first step to trying to change the character of the building. And you saw in the imagery, first the roof is one that's under consideration, and the second is some features around the building and on the building that might help change it. I think the lanterns are really nice. If I could get gas lanterns out there, I mean, that would be sweet. And then also like these planters so that I don't feel like the sidewalk and the building and the cars are all too close to each other. So I can provide a little bit of a green buffer. That's it. That was just like, I wonder what it looks like. And I mean, to your point, like, I would love to see bigger things there. I mean, I'd almost like to see trees if there was room, but I'd like to see bigger, greener elements to help soften that first floor colonnade, or the colonnade. That was in a prior application, which was not considered favorably.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it, and I'm sure it wasn't picked up by the mic.
I said, the brick.
I say approved.
I think. What are you gonna? I think one thing that's that I want to make note of is this building currently is an eyesore in the way that it currently sits. So I that's my opinion.
Yeah. Okay.
I also believe that it is not one of historical significance. However, I also very much understand that the circle is a lot of brick there, and changing that would make a big difference. What I see here is tiered potential applications coming in with different changes. I think that a lot of different changes can make this look way better. I think we made a comment at the last meeting that we'd like to see a much more comprehensive plan. But as these meetings go on, and my experience as a new commissioner, I realize the more layers that you add in for an application, the harder it is to determine it feasible. So I definitely understand why it's important, that the paint just be specific to itself. For me, my personal opinion is that a 32-part dilution might actually, not be that bad. In my personal preference, I would like to see a lot more, and I definitely don't like that black roof. But I know that's an administrative component. But I think that with the repairs that the staff is recommending, there's going to need to be some type of, beautification of the facade, or else it's just going to continue to look worse. So I would like there to be more comments from other commissioners that,
Well,
I'd like to have more of a discussion if we can.
the normal order of business would be to hear from staff, and then we will have discussion. Right now, we just want to confine ourselves to asking clarifying questions from the applicant.
That's all my.
Okay, if there, Bill?
The finish that you are proposing, what is the life of that finish? I know it's a lime wash. I would think it would have a tendency over time to dissipate from the top down.
Well, it's a good question. We've seen buildings that have been done, almost 100 years ago with this finish on it. And it does fade over time. It softens over time. And also, the environment, puts other things onto it as another layer. There's dust and dirt, it's like Italy. So there's more stuff that goes on it. But yes, it could fade over time. I've not seen it where it changes dramatically from top to bottom differently unless there's overhangs involved. And in this building, there really aren't any. So the exposure from top to bottom is uniform in terms of weather.
Are the lanterns part of this application?
No, not at this time.
My other question is the applicators. This seems to be more of a craft application as opposed to a
Painter.
contractor's application. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a blotchy or inconsistent finish. So how do we, judge, or how are we sure that this just won't end up to be much whiter or much darker than what's proposed, and how would we correct that?
Well, we worked with a company that's used it before, and they were familiar with the challenges associated with putting the surface on. It takes time. It's not, you don't just spray this stuff. You got to.
Is
has
it
to be.
sprayed?
No, it's kind of.
It can be sprayed or rolled.
Yeah, but we decided not to spray it because it gets too. It doesn't. I didn't like the way it laid, so this was rolled on, and touched up a little bit because sometimes the joints are a little bit. But you've got to hand touch it. You got to touch all of it.
If I could add something to, it's applied to the surface, and then it's generally white
Right.
at some point after it has been applied, and that's how you start to control. You kind of time it, and there is some art and craft involved in it, but the people who do this are. So there is wiping that goes. You can
Yes.
control it
Oh,
even after.
Is
the-
your microphone on? Are you speaking into the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was just. Gosh, how far
What
back
else?
do I need to
Uh,
go?
Hold on.
Okay.
Okay.
Simply, again, just restating that, the product can be rolled or sprayed, and then the applicator can wipe that down with a wet cloth within 2 hours of the original application and control levels of
of opacity so he can step back, work to other areas, come back and modify and try to even things out as he goes, or achieve the more you know.
Thank you. I want to ask John a question right now on this point, if I may. Can we condition the approval, if we were going to approve it, to a stated applier, firm?
Or
What-
style, maybe? Like hand paint
who is
versus-
the firm?
yeah.
Do you have them chosen? I mean, it was Annapolis
Yeah, that's
Services
what I'm
that put
getting
your test patches on.
That's right. And we would plan to use them again because they had experience and we thought they did a nice job in helping us
Yeah.
figure out how it all worked.
Bill phrased it, I think, in a more appropriate way to ask for the qualifications of whoever would put it on rather than designating a firm. John, do you think that's something that we could condition?
Well, I could certainly look at prior applications if I'm given examples.
Yeah.
Well, well, if I might chime in there on that point, maybe an extra layer, instead of maybe saying who has to do it, maybe saying the application itself, like it must it must be hand painted with a brush and not a sprayer. Like, is that?
Well, what Mr. Wilson was saying was that it would probably be applied with a roller. That we talked about a roller as opposed to brushing.
Yeah, so we could
traditional
make
to brush it.
a condition that limited how it would be applied, so it would be as you're presenting. That's basically what
I can certainly take a
Well,
look
I'm not
at
saying
the
I'm not going
method
to recommend
if-
this. I
right.
just want to be clear.
Bill, you brought up another good point. Can I touch on your point you just made? Or you can go first.
No, go ahead.
But in terms of the varying degrees of finishes with the condition, is it possible to say that it must be, if there was a conditional approval considered, it must be within 32 part dilution, and if there was a deviation from that, that would be in violation of the approval, or is enforcement not as feasible? I guess is that a well phrased question?
It's a little like I'm not going to say Pandora's box, but once it's on,
It's on.
Yeah.
it's on.
Yeah.
And so the inconsistency is always a possibility.
Unless the commissioners intend to sit during the dilution process in shifts, it might be hard
Must
to
be done
control.
between 7 and 9 p.m. during a public hearing.
Well, a good point of discussion. So, John, you want to say? Oh, go ahead.
So when we talked about this the first time you proposed the wash, there was some concern about the permanence of it. Should some future commission decide that they don't approve of it anymore, how permanent is this? What happens? What reassurances can we have that should this turn out to be awful, some future commission can decide to fix it?
They can't act on it. The city would have to act on it based on what decisions we made. They can't say, "Well, we don't like it now, so take it."
Sure. Sorry. The point, however it's done administratively, how permanent is this? Is if for some reason some entity decides it needs to be fixed, can it be changed?
Well, there's a window of time where you can take it off and it largely will go away, but it's very short. So the building would always have this patina to it. You can soften it with muriatic acid and other things that you would traditionally use to clean masonry work. And it's used all the time when masonry's new. So you think a wall looks great. Well, it does until they wash it after they put the mortar in the joints. So all of them are washed down, garden walls and everything else for the most part. So you could soften it a touch, but you're not gonna undo it 100%.
John, did you want to add anything else?
Would you like me to speak about the application? So, if you look at the picture that's currently on the screen, what you see is the Maryland Inn, and you see a bit of the courthouse. And I think what you also see is a more prominent 10 to 14 church circle. My basis for review is the context of this building, and it always has been the context of the building. The building is visible from Northwest Street, is visible from School Street, it's visible from College Avenue, it's highly visible because it's a circle and highly prominent also. The other thing is once you begin to add white, it also becomes more reflective. And that's in the literature for this material. So something to keep in mind as commissioners, because this is going to have a different quality of reflectivity for light on summer days, or car lights or other illumination. Certainly, I know that Hammond Wilson and the owner are trying to do something to improve this building. It's difficult. It's of a certain period of time, and it's within a context of some of the most important buildings in the city. Right now, it's not prominent. It's just large. And its form, they've tried, and I think successfully tried, to break it down with the different pieces of window, post. So the massing is somewhat, let's say, ameliorated. I think that painting it may accent that mass. It may bring it out. And I know that considerable effort has been put into considering this, but my staff's approach is I stand by all these guidelines, and I think that the relationship between old and new is going to be significantly altered here. I wish it weren't. Obviously, 80 Compromise Street, white opacity, it worked, and the commission approved it. It was fine. Here, that wouldn't work, so we've gone back to considering whitewash. My own impression from looking at the samples was it just accented the differences in the brick surface rather than unified them. So the picture that I used in the staff report showed inconsistencies. Now, some of those are because there's mortar missing. Some of those are because there's different mortar color. This building has a very distinct original mortar. It is almost pink. You have to look at it, but it's there. So it wasn't as though they were not trying to create something of quality here. It was quality of its day. I mean, they could have gone with the standard tan or gray mortar, but they didn't. They used a custom mortar. So in areas where there isn't the original mortar, it's going to look different than areas where the original mortar stands, and that's just going to bring things out. So every patch on this is going to stand out. So my approach to this is to keep it in context where it's not prominent. And I know that that's not what the applicant or the owner wants to hear, but I think right now its prominence is appropriately understated. And my recommendation is to not approve the whitewash and to keep it in its current state with some maintenance. It would be great to see some maintenance on this building.
Okay. Thank you, John. Seeing there's no members of the public present at all, we have no necessity of going through taking public testimony, and the normal procedure at this point would be for us to discuss among ourselves what our individual opinions are about whether this should be approved or not. And I will take the privilege of the chair to speak first and say that while I have great respect Mr. Wilson, you want to say something?
I just wanted to respond to John's comments. We understand that there are differences in the mortar, and so as part of this process, we would need to make the mortar more uniform rather than the areas that have been repaired poorly. So those would have to be made more uniform first, so we don't have that problem with the areas that were fixed poorly versus not fixed at all. So step one is, of course, to repoint the areas that need to be repointed with the appropriate product so that the appearance would be more uniform. So I wanted to make sure that if we're worried about, deficiencies in place right now, which I understand completely, we can conditionally say you got to do it this way, this way, this way, which we're happy to entertain. So,
And Mr. Wilson is correct. If we wanted to vote for approval, we could condition that act, and that would be a very normal proceeding. And thank you for clarifying that. I just want to say that while I have great respect for the architect and he has worked with us on this and other projects very cooperatively, to a great degree, this is a subjective judgment in the end, because we're talking about it's the context, it's how this building functions in its site, and the churches of primary historical, architectural, cultural significance. The Reynolds House is also the post office, the governor's mansion, the courthouse. All of these are major buildings that are architecturally, historically, and culturally significant. And given that, I cannot support this. I think the building, as it is, I don't think is that awful, but it also, in its current state, is more consistent and doesn't fight for prominence. And because of that, I can't support it. But I need to hear from my fellow commissioners.
I want to say yes. I really do, Leo. Your impassioned talk is well taken. I agree. I've really started noticing this building from Church Circle, and I'm not as offended as when you first presented the first time. Like, yeah, we need to do something about this building. I would be more in favor of something that was more forward-leaning than lime wash. Lime wash worked amazingly well on that house on the Eastern Shore, just gorgeous. Just that was definitely the right decision. I just find that this is trying to, it's an old application to a more modern house, and I'd be in favor of something that was more forward-leaning than backward-leaning. So I would go with the staff's recommendation.
Leo, you've made me look at this building in a whole different way. That building has always stood out as an independent structure there ever since it was built. And there were people who weren't really happy with the fact it was built because it was dominating and it was overbearing. I don't believe a lime wash is necessarily going to correct that or adjust it that much. I do have, as I've stated, I'm concerned about the application and the longevity, and if we may not be creating some type of maintenance issue. If for some reason a repair or repointing had to be done, you're going to then try to touch up the lime wash. And on a circle like this, as about 2 years ago happened on a straight road, cars have a habit of hitting buildings. The building jumps out, gets in the car's way, and it gets hit. So then we need to do a repair, not just matching brick, not just matching mortar, but now we have to get the correct wash in there and blend it all. It seems like it could be creating an issue in that line. I think the lime wash is imaginative, but I think it's not appropriate in this particular case.
Could you jump to slide number 5, please? I think you guys have a different presentation than us. I'm looking for the view of from Church Circle existing condition on the application. So this is what it currently looks like right now. I want to take a little bit of a differing position. I think that all of the points that you guys are making are very valid. Jumping back to the point of tiering this application, I think who we have here is we have an owner who says, I want to make this building beautiful and I'm trying to find ways. For me personally, it's hard to just look at the lime wash and say, oh, this is the solution. But I can look at several iterations of applications and say, oh, step by step by step, this transforms this into something that, you know, looks a lot better than it does now. One thing of note that I see in the staff report that I believe is maybe actually could have been in the application, but they've been told as a part of their study, their feasibility study, that the repairs that staff does recommend will leave this in a will leave the facade in a position where it might have even differing variations of color and appearance than it does now. And it might be cleaned up a little bit, but it might not be able to repair all the things. So when I look at this, I see a building that does not necessarily look that great as it is right now, needs repairs, needs power washing. I think that's going to make a big difference, but it also might expose some variations in the appearance of the facade. And so if there is, you know, a plan, which it seems to be for multiple iterations here to beautify this, you know, I think a subjective opinion on whether or not we like lime wash versus a different iteration, I think is, or a different type of, you know, design, I think is something that I don't feel like should be the main obstacle. So what I jump to is the surrounding building. So on this slide here, I see a different brick texture than Treaty of Paris, Maryland and I just Treaty of Paris. And then if there's another image, I believe it was 2 slides after this, and then maybe 4 slides after, and then 6 slides after. So and I apologize if it's, what I'm trying to do is see the side-by-side of this with the courthouse, and then there's another one that's a better prominent picture with the Treaty of Paris. I don't see this fitting in with those other brick buildings. Obviously, it's a brutalist structure. When I look at the courthouse, it's gorgeous. When I look at the post office, it's gorgeous. When I look at the church, it's gorgeous, right? When I look at this, I'm like, not there. And so I don't, you know, while I look at the lime wash and I don't, you know, necessarily love how that looks by itself, I do think that this is the first step of many that will greatly improve the facade. And the one question that I have, the primary concern that I have is I want to make sure that this does not set a precedent for administrative approval in the future, and that it would still have to come before the commission if other buildings wanted to follow, because that would be my primary concern. I wouldn't want any conditional approval to give somebody else the leg up to say, oh, we're just going to paint this with a different, somebody else besides John's in there. And I think it's worth a conversation to talk about the bigger picture.
The guideline's clear.
Yeah. The guidelines are clear.
You can paint a brick building if it has been painted before.
And I
but
do
you
believe
have
they
to,
did provide that precedent.
Right, well, this one's never been painted.
The building that was in this location was brick painted white.
Different building.
Different. Oh, yeah.
Right.
And precedent, remember that precedent, and our, I'm not making a political statement, even if it sounds like it. Our current Supreme Court has shown that precedent is a series of decisions that have been built upon one another, but any court or any commission such as ours that's quasi-judicial is not bound to follow that.
Okay.
So the whole thing that's much been discussed recently about, oh, we'll set terrible precedent, it's a legitimate concern, but those actions are not binding on future applications in the case.
Can you jump to the one that shows the side-by-side with the courthouse? I think it's a couple after this one, at least in application. I think if you keep going, it's so on the slide that I'm looking at, it's 13 on the application, slide number 13. But I do, anyway, what I'm looking at on slide number 13, and I don't know, I can pass this around if that's useful. I see a completely different brick. I see a completely different facade. And it's hard for me to relate the two and say, you can't do something here because of this. I mean, they feel so very different. And I'm coming from a primary standpoint of saying, I think something should be done. And it doesn't look like this is the end of the application process. It looks like this is the first of many steps. And it looks like that there could be a lot of improvements here that we might look at the end result and say, wow, I wish we had seen this to begin with. But I also understand.
Well, there's nothing to prevent the applicant from not coming back and rolling a whole bunch of things into one application. I think they're trying to parse it out and move in a more pragmatic way. Is that fair, Leo?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, look, given the structures there, this is about layers, right? And what can you do in a measured way that gives us an opportunity to adjust with a subsequent move? And that's why we came in with this. I understand the position that the positions we've heard so far. It's just it's difficult for me because an intervention here is going to change things. It's going to make that space different. And the concern is I'm not sure it's going to be better. And the universe rewards action, right? Like something could be done, and it could be done in a modest way to adjust the experience there. And that's why we did it in such a modest way. The last thing that happens to this, when the third step is, it gets washed off. So you can wash it off until you get to a layer that looks good. Like you put it on, you let it sit, and then you wash it off. And it gets washed off with a it's not a power washer, but it's a stream of water. And so, you can wash a lot of it off. And so, like I said, I'm as concerned about it as the commissioner. I live here too. I've been here a long time. So I'm just asking for some latitude. Like I said,
let's hear from
understand it.
Commissioner Greeley. He's the only one who hasn't spoken, and then perhaps we can consider a vote.
So I'm inclined to approve. I think that building falls in a black hole, and we're having trouble fishing it out and deciding what kind of a building it is. And we're in this strange circular argument where we say we all agree that we hate it.
No, I didn't say that.
Sure.
I didn't say that.
So I don't hate this building.
But we're concerned. We all agree that it shouldn't be there. It's large. It's not really in keeping with the rest of the circle. And yet, we're also saying we'd like to continue to dislike it in the way we currently dislike it. We'd hate to be put in a position where we have to dislike it in a new way.
That's well said.
I am mindful most of all, and I'm trying to not let this creep into my decision, that my primary concern right now is that all of my mother's friends at St. Anne's will hate the fact that they have to dislike it in a new way and let me hear about it. But that...
And they will.
Oh, I know. I know. So it's neither a building from the period of historic significance where we would know what the answer is, nor is it a new build where we would know what the answer is. We're stuck with a build that is not what we want. So to start with a sense of dissatisfaction about the building and then say, well, at the very least, the bricks are roughly the same color as the courthouse, which is profoundly more beautiful. And they're kind of the same color as the Treaty of Paris or the Maryland Inn, which is profoundly more beautiful and historic. and then to say you can't alter it in a way that would call attention to it. It must be hideous and hidden. Do not call attention to it by improving the surface or changing the surface. Doesn't sound to me like a reasonable request to the building's owner.
I think I understand your point, but I'm not sure that that's really what we're saying. I think what I'm saying is that the guidelines here are pretty straightforward, and that this would call so much more attention to it, even if it was subjectively an improvement. That's inappropriate and not something that I can support. Well, we've all had a chance. I think Bill wants to say one more thing, but we've all had a chance to express our opinion.
You made me think of something that I hadn't considered before. We look at historic buildings as being from this time period to this time period. Every building that's built is a historic building. It's just not old enough to be recognized yet. This building represents, well, brutalists. Maybe not great brutalists, but it's Annapolis brutalists. It's the only one downtown. Does that deserve to be preserved? It is a historic item within itself in its own time period.
With that comment, people also said that had the same conversation about City Dock, saying this parking lot's been here for 40 years. Should we preserve this part of history? Do we want to preserve this part of history?
You are
That parking lot was a functional item throughout its history, and it's still going to be a functional item. It transitioned historically to the needs of the community at the time, from having fish packings, from having lumber, to having all these other things. That entire downtown area, because it's on the dock, has morphed continually. It is not any part of it that has really only sat there, except for some small pieces, for really a significant amount of time. Unlike the church, unlike the courthouse, unlike Maryland Inn, and these other buildings. All I'm saying is, if we look at this one building, it does have a historic context within itself that sets it apart from the other buildings, and it contrasts the colonial periods, whatever period you want to call it, Queen Anne, right on through those, all the way up to this 1970s brutalist, we hate the world architecture. It's just there, I'm here, I'm staying, I'm done, leave me alone. That's what the building does. It just sits there.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that going around. Downtown at the dock, as always changed as far as I know in my life. One of the most historic pieces down there is that stupid billboard. That thing goes back, what was it, 80, 90 years now?
I'm not sure about that, but it's at least 70.
It's at least 70. It's a historic element.
In the broadest definition of that.
It's in people's crosshairs.
I completely agree in the abstract that all buildings eventually become historic and that we never know what it is that we're destroying. Speaking as somebody who consistently encounters archives that somebody didn't think were important and they destroyed them because they didn't think anybody in the future would want to read them. I may be, the reason I brought up the period of historic significance is not out of some conviction that Annapolis has to be colonial and nothing else, but I'm actually curious about our special charge.
I wasn't arguing
commission.
with you.
That's why I was wondering.
Well,
Could I make one more comment?
yes.
And with all that said, you made me think of something, and that is, we're looking at one element changing this building. I think you could convince me more if we were looking at the roof, at the lantern, look at the entire package. What's your vision to make this the best it can be, given that it has problems? And isolating this one component it didn't convince me.
I think that's a good observation. I would concur. But I think we've
Well,
made our
I want
opinion.
to just make one closing comment. The only thing I think is important for us to consider is I do think the building in its current stature does take away from the surrounding building. When I drive past it, it does take away from Treaty of Paris, from the courthouse, and from St. And that's why I'm coming from the perspective that I am. So, I'm not sure that we're there tonight, and so I'll echo your point that for me, seeing all of the iterations, I think is very helpful. If there was a feeling there tonight, I would be inclined to move, or excuse me, I would be inclined to provide an opinion of approval with conditions on hand painting and on 32 parts, and I'd be excited for the future iterations, but. If it's not necessarily where we are tonight, then I really would like to see an application where there's a lot of components here that we can look at, because I do believe that this is something that we can amend to better suit the circle, and I don't think the existing brick suits the surrounding.
I hesitate to do this because we've had a good discussion and brought up a number of significant thoughts. But I'm going to do what I do occasionally. I am a historian of American art. And among the things that I feel are most important about our community are the Nicholson Plan. That is of universal historical significance. And he created a church circle. And I'm an atheist, but I honor the fact that he created a church circle because of the importance of religion to his time, his culture, and thus our history. And in the guidelines and the rules that we follow as the Historic Preservation Commission, I think we need to honor the significance individually of the church, of the other buildings, but even more importantly, that the creator of the Annapolis City Plan, which was earth-shaking for our history, nothing should overwhelm that church. And I think if we paint this white, now we've created a competition between those two buildings that I can't accept. So I think we've had a good discussion. If more needs to be said, then it should be said, but I think we also could entertain a motion for approval or disapproval.
Before you vote, can I make a comment?
Yes.
So to the point several commissioners have brought up about a more comprehensive package, I just want you to think about that for a minute from the applicant's side. The third time here to talk about what I think is a modest intervention, which I understand the concerns about, but I'm not going to be able to convince a client to come back with a more robust plan that includes this if the vote is no on the lime wash. Like, then what do I do? And so just keep in mind what the ask is here. We want to be partners with the commission, as we always are. These are discussions, and this is how we get things, I think, better in this city. And so I'm asking, we'll come in for this, we'll do our best job with it, and we'll come in with the rest of it, and we'll layer it together. Like the planters, we'll pick the planters. They're too big, they're too small. We'll pick the lanterns. The lanterns are too big, they're too small. We're not crazy about the color of the roof. John says that we can come and get that administratively. I'm happy to come in here and talk about it again with the group, because we might put 2 or 3 samples up there and say, hey, the black is lousy, but the gray is good. Green might be good. I don't know. But again, this is the process. And so you need to remember that my client only got so much capacity to go through this after a year of it. So just keep that in mind as you vote tonight. And again, thank you.
And I want to just add, Brennan, you made a comment. You said something we dislike now, changing it to something that we dislike that's different. And I want to add a third layer. If we don't allow any change to occur here, it might turn into something we dislike even more than we do now without us having an opinion on that change. And they have clearly stated that if they follow through with staff's recommendations of power washing and repairing, it will look different and might even expose other like places. And I really appreciate your comment about taking away from the church. I think that is one of the most important considerations, aside from the fact that, its relevance to surrounding buildings aside from the church. I also feel like when I drive past here, it is like the way that the facade is presented to me feels like it's crumbling. It feels like that there's a lack of investment here. And from a commercial real estate perspective, from a person who wants to beautify this, and again, I'm not necessarily in love with the lime wash, but I know that there's a bigger picture, and I really think that the existing condition takes away from the church.
So
It really does, and I think it could get worse if we don't force what we want to happen here. Then something will happen anyway. A lack of choice is aging, and I think that's important too.
I have to address one thing. In terms of repair, a good repair is not visible. A bad repair is visible. I did work on buildings for projects that went over long periods of time, and the greatest compliment was, "It looks great. What did you do?" And that's what the standard would be for any repairs that are going to occur here. It's not going to be, "Oh yeah, we picked up this bag of mortar at Home Depot and we're gonna put it on the lintel here."
Well, in your
No,
recommendation, I'm not seeing anything that like
It's
that
in there.
requires
You
the type
read
of
it
contract.
carefully. It's in there. It's in there.
Gentlemen,
But I'm telling you, I take this very seriously.
I'm
It's
just going to
about mortar
suggest.
matching and all of these little elements. Everybody loves to come in, and we're going to get into production here. That's not going to happen.
We've had a robust and thoughtful discussion, but I think we're ready for a motion to act.
I mean, I would put forth a motion to approve with condition that it's hand painted, like hand brushed, and it is the 32 lime wash. So that would be my motion.
And the staff's
And then
recommended.
the staff's repair. Yeah.
Okay, motion made. Is there a second for that motion? Okay. Motion made and seconded. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No. Motion fails by a 3-2 vote. Thank you, though. I mean, this was the kind of discussion I think we need to have. It was thoughtful. It was not just, picking at this thing or not, but what it is that we're doing with our community. Now, I would take the liberty, and if you disagree, please say so. Leo, I think if you can get your client to come back with a more comprehensive plan, I think you'd be getting a lot of close attention for that. And I know I would look at it more favorably, whether it included lime wash or not. Okay.
As always, thanks so much for the time and consideration. And we've been here before. I didn't get my way, and but I got a lot of information that I think will help. So I'll go back and talk with my client and see if maybe we can talk again about this. I did not withdraw this application, so the application is turned down. So if I come back in with modifications that would include a lime wash in it, is that something that you're allowed to consider? I don't know the answer to that. That's why I'm asking.
There's a
attorney
time.
address
There's a
that?
time frame for denial.
Well-
I believe it's a year, Leo.
It is a year, so of the denial.
I don't know. That's a point of law that I
No,
don't
it's
think
it's
I
in
can.
our it's in
No. I know what you're saying is exactly right, but I don't know if you can fold in a component into something larger and different.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
please do.
So we've denied lime wash, and the application wasn't withdrawn, but lime wash can come back again within a year if gas lanterns are part of an application.
I'm only asking if that's possible legal.
Well, and
well,
I'm not saying
I can
that
tell
I'm-
you I can tell you by our guidelines and code it's not.
so the motion that was put forth was for lime wash with the 32 dilution to be hand painted on, or not by machinery, with the staff recommendations for repair. So if they come back with another application with more comprehensive components and slight variations of that, where's the line that's drawn?
The line that's drawn is for painting the brick. I mean, this is two.
I think this is a question.
And the thing is, honestly, I was surprised that it didn't come up that you wanted to withdraw it when you saw that there were two against. I mean, 3 against or two for.
This is a point that I don't think we can resolve. Our attorney can't address the point at this moment. We need an answer, but my inclination is that John is correct.
I have to tell you also, precedent for gas lanterns is that if there was evidence of a gas lantern on a building, then it could be approved. In this case, I don't think there ever were gas lanterns. So it's the guideline for creating a false sense of history.
Well,
just want to mention that before we move forward.
okay.
As I said, thanks so much for
Thank you for
the
your
consideration,
patience.
and we'll decide what to do next and move on.
Thank you both. We could approve minutes of past meetings, which I think were distributed. I'm not positive. Yeah. So then, no, this is the way I would recommend we proceed. John, do we have business that we could, other business we could take up on our administrative meeting this month?
Well, certainly. So if we're getting into other business, administrative business, one of the things that is certainly of interest is the decision regarding the Maritime Welcome Center. You have signed the certificate of approval, but a written decision is requested on
Yes. Okay, that's a very good point, and I'm glad I asked, and I'm glad you were able to provide that. We actually are being asked to proceed in a way that I've not been accustomed to. I don't think Bill has been either. Normally, our findings are done sort of behind the scenes and back office and moved forward. We're being asked to actually review them as a commission, and they're, of course, quite important in this instance. So let's postpone the minutes and take it up with that, which will be ready by the administrative meeting, and any other business that John has that he wants to bring to our. Is that agreeable? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting? Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, made and tripled. Okay, thank you all. Tonight's meeting is